So the 8-inch subwoofer in my Lexus LS430 has been blown, and I'm going to replace it with this Polk Audio DB840 DVC dual voice coil. As you can see, I've repaired this with some speaker foam, kind of rubber cement, if you will. But while I have it out, I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. And then if this Polk ever blows, maybe I'll put this one back in. So we're going to show you how to do this today. And thanks to if you've Googled for this, you probably already saw some helpful Amazon reviews for this speaker, and some other mad Russian forums on how to take this car apart. So many thanks to those guys for getting me a head start. And this video should show you some more steps in detail. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the bottom bench of the rear seat. This doesn't require any tools other than your hands, and it's probably the easiest part of the job. And what you're going to do is between each kind of seat, if you can imagine a person sitting here, you're going to literally right between the imaginary person's legs, there's pretty much a plastic and metal catch, and that you're just going to kind of lift and pop. And there's one on the driver, middle, and passenger side. So you're going to literally reach a hand here and here, lift, and then it'll pop out. And then you're going to, once you lift it up, you're going to lift it up maybe like a 45-degree angle and pull it forward just a little bit so we can get to the next step. But you'll know there's three main catches, and once you pull those out, we'll move on. Once you've lifted up the rear bench and separated it from the catches below, before you can remove it, the left and right side, driver and passenger, there's a wiring harness for the heat seater. So disconnect this on each side, one over there, and then the seat will come out. So here's what the rear bench looks like with the seat removed. As you can see, there's no tools required to remove the bench. There's just three kind of retention clips that you force out. So if you want to imagine this between the imaginary legs of the passenger center and driver side passenger, you're going to kind of literally reach under the seat, under each seat on each side of this, and carefully lift this out. And then the rear bench, just kind of, you lift it up at a 45-degree angle and pull it away from the back of the car, and then it slides right out. So this is pretty much the easiest part of the job. All right, before we can remove the back of the bench, we got to remove the driver and passenger headrests, and behind each one there's a little plastic nut cover, this little thing, and there's one on the driver's side. So remove these carefully so you don't damage your leather, and then we'll need a 12mm socket to get rid of a couple of bolts. So there are three 12mm nuts along the top. So there's one behind this headrest, behind the little plastic cover, and behind the driver's side headrest. And the tricky one is behind the center armrest guard. So you pull down the armrest, you open the rear access door, and then you can kind of carefully pull back this plastic cover, and back there is the middle nut. So remove these three nuts with a 12mm socket, and don't lose them. And then we'll go on to the bottom of the back of the bench. All right, there are four black bolts along the bottom of the rear seat that you can remove with a 12mm socket. There's one right here, back here, behind this seat belt here, and where is it? Up here. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So remove those. Once you have the seat bolts loose, the seat can kind of come out. But before it can even go anywhere, there's a wiring harness for the heated seats that you have to disconnect, and the connector is actually under this side garnish. And so this is kind of what they look like, and you can kind of, I've already got them disconnected here, but you can kind of reach back there with a flathead screwdriver, depress the retaining clip, and slide them out carefully. Or you can fast forward and maybe remove the door sill and the side and this trim piece and the side garnish and the rear garnish, roof garnish, and then make it easier to unplug. But it's not too difficult to unplug these two with these garnishes in place. Now that we have the back seat bolts out, we're almost ready to take the back seat out. Before we can do that, we have to remove the seatbelt guides for the 3 rear seats. This is really easy. Get a number 2 Phillips or larger, and the ones on the left or right, there's like 1 large screw and 2 smaller ones, but a number 2 Phillips should remove them. There are just 2 small Phillips on the middle one, and again, the 1 large and 2 small on the driver's side. So remove those, and then the seatbelt guides, this plastic piece comes off, and then you can just slide them down, and then the whole back seat slides out behind the seat belts, and then we can get to the side garnishes and the rear deck. Take off the rear dash, but before we can do that, we need to take off these side garnishes. And it makes the whole process a lot easier. I highly recommend you do this. Trying to remove that or remove the sub without removing these side parts just make it really difficult. And removing them is really easy to do once you know the trick. So the first thing is to remove this door sill, and you literally, it's got three kind of clips that you can pull up. So you start on the inside and pull it up, and it comes out this way. Once you have the door sill, this trim literally is inlaid around the frame, and you can just slide this all the way out, all the way around to the other side. Then this second door garnish literally lifts right up, and it comes off. The toughest one is this roof rear garnish. And let me go over to the other side. So I've got the other side off already, and I can kind of show you the trick to getting this thing back on, or off actually. Okay, so here's a view of the again, the hard part, getting these side garnishes out before we can get to the rear deck. So again, you start with the door sill. Again, you start from prying from the inside, and there are 3 retention clips that hold that in. And once you do that, you can remove all of this door trim around the edge. I started on the rear side, and once you have it removed up to about the roof, you can leave it in, because we're just getting out the rest of the parts. This is the side door sill or door garnish. Again, these clips just kind of clip onto the frame, and that one's an easy one to get off. The hard one to get off again is this roof garnish. So there is that kind of like locking bolt. That's not really a locking bolt. Again, that bolt kind of goes into this hole and then slides back. And so when you're removing it, you're pulling out all of these snaps, and then the last thing you do is there's a snap. They're all the snaps, if you can see them all. The last thing you do is pull the piece forward to that larger hole, and then the garnish comes out. And then putting it in, slightly easier, but use a plastic pry tool to get those back ones. And remember, protect your tint with like some cardboard or something as a fulcrum for leverage. And then these pieces really come out quickly. So definitely remove these. It makes it a lot easier to remove the deck, and it only takes a minute once you know the secrets. Okay, so the trick to removing this LS430 roof rear side garnish is knowing where the snaps are and how to unhook it. So there are 3 of those plastic snaps along the top here. I recommend using one of these plastic kind of interior removal tool crowbars. If your windows are tinted, put like some cardboard up against it, so you have that you can fulcrum on, so you're not damaging your tint. And then once those come off, there's another snap. There's not a snap here. There's a hook here, and then there's a snap here and a snap here, and that's it. And then what you do once you get those snaps undone is, and I have this other side undone. So here's the hook on the rear left driver's side. You kind of pull the thing forward, and then the snap kind of literally comes out of this larger hole. So it took me a while to figure that out, and there weren't really any pictures in the manual how to do this. But once you kind of undo the snaps, and then you're kind of sliding the garnish forward out of that kind of locking hole, and then the garnish comes out, and then we can get to this rear deck. Okay, so now that we have the side garnishes off of each side, we are ready to take off the rear dash, or the rear deck. So the subwoofer cover is held on with 4 of those kind of just like press and lock connectors. You can pry that off first, and that might be a good thing to actually do, to actually see if your sub is actually blown. I know mine is, so we're just going to pull everything out at once. The rear deck is held in with two of these kind of plastic retention clips. These are those plastic clips that once you pull out and push in 2 or 3 times, they're pretty much worthless. So pull these out carefully, or have some spares. So you basically pull these 2 pins out and then lift the dash up, or the rear deck out carefully, and pull it out. And then I just kind of let it slide down the back here, so we don't have to disconnect the seat belt. So then we'll be ready to take out the sub. Okay, so now that we have the rear deck off, we take out the sub, where there are 4 10mm bolts around it, and then we disconnect the wiring harness, and then it comes out, and then we'll be ready to put in the replacement sub. So we've got the sub out. I'm going to use some noise canceling cheap material to fill in these holes. There's one back there, and one over here, and one back there. So we're going to use some noise canceling material to fill those in, hopefully give the subwoofer some more filling bass. But this step isn't really required. If you want to go above and beyond, you can even put more of that material back here, but that's all I'm going to do. Okay, so we've got some sound dampening material covering some holes on this rear dash, and now we're about ready to put the replacement sub in. So now we're ready to prep this new Polk speaker for the rear deck enclosure. The first thing we need to do is remove this rubber ring around it. So this is going to make it pretty difficult to return and void your warranty, but get this rubber ring off. What we need to do to get this subwoofer to work electronically is short one of the voice coils, or jump, if you will. So the original Mark Levinson sub is, as you can see, close to about 12 ohms of resistance, and it's really supposed to be 8, I believe. So I might not be using my multimeter really exactly right, but so something we want to do for this new Polk sub is jump the voice coils. So instead of getting 4 ohms, what it's rated for, or a dual 4 ohm voice coil, we kind of jump the 2 in series, so we get 8. So right now we're getting 4 ohms on this. So we'll jump one voice coil positive to the negative over here. Let's see. And then we'll move the negative of my multimeter over to here. And through electrical magic, we get a little over 8 ohms. So that's kind of what we're going for. So pretty much short or jump, if you will, jump a negative on one side and a positive on the other on this thing, and you'll get about 8 ohms, which is kind of what we want to put on the amp. So if you don't do this, there's not going to be enough resistance provided to the amp, and the amp is going to work a bit harder, and you might shorten the life of your amplifier. So jump or short with some good speaker wire, a negative and a positive on each side, and then we'll get the rest of the wiring done. So I've got one side of this Polk sub jumped or connected, so the voice coils are going to run in series, and I've got my multimeter on the other side, positive and negative, and we can see we're looking at close to 8 ohms, which is exactly what we want to see. Now we need to take the plastic mounting bracket off the old Mark Levinson sub. So you're going to need a Torx 20-bit or driver to remove this. So one of these guys, and then we're going to remove these 4 screws to remove the plastic housing, and then we'll get it over onto the Polk sub. Got these 4 Torx 20 screws out. This frame, this mounting bracket kind of comes right off. There's like a silicone ring or a rubber ring around the underside of it that we want to kind of preserve. And then we also need to move the wiring harness. So I clipped it right where it joins the voice coil, pulled it out through this little mounting bracket, this kind of track here. And then on the other side of the main, or on the other side of the sub, once you kind of push down this retention clip, it should slide right out of the subwoofer. And now we're going to attach these two things to the new subwoofer. Okay, so we've got this woofer kind of wired with the voice coils in series, so we should have 8 ohms. So from the positive side to the negative side over here, they're just junked with some speaker wire. And then from the negative side to the negative of the original harness, and the positive to the positive of the original harness. And so this kind of lines up exactly kind of where the original Mark Levinson thing comes. And so if we put a multimeter between these two, we should read 8 ohms. And now we're ready to get this bracket onto this thing. So next step. All right, so we're ready to mount the woofer onto the mounting bracket that goes in the trunk. When you lift this Polk Audio woofer and the Mark Levinson, it's night and day. This new one is much heavier, but it's also a little bigger, and it does not fit exactly into this bracket. And we need to modify one and or the other to get it to mount securely. There's a lot of ways you can do this. What I did was I held the bracket kind of under the woofer, and I marked a few places where I wanted to cut around the trim to make sure that these original woofer to bracket mounting points would fit around the woofer nicely. I didn't want to modify this original bracket just in case, I wanted to return it back to stock at some point. Anyway, and then once we do that, we're going to drill through some existing holes on the woofer we are going to end up drilling some holes into the bracket so we can attach the two. And if you want to do it really nicely, put some of this basically liquid gasket between the woofer and the mounting bracket, and this will and that'll just ensure reduce vibrations, a better seal. You can pick that up for like $5 at any auto shop. So I cut these holes. I'm going to mount the bracket, and then we're going to get ready to mount. So next, finally done. So we've got the Mark Levinson bracket attached to the Polk Audio woofer. This was these are the original 4 Torx 20 screws. They are just long enough to go through some of the pre-drilled holes on the woofer and through the mounting bracket. I did use a 1/8 inch drill bit to go through these all the way through the bracket so they could hold. So yeah, my original bracket is modified a bit, but it's just a few holes. And I was able to save the original rubber gasket that goes around under the Mark Levinson woofer that was actually survived pretty well on the original mounting bracket, so I'm going to use that. But I am going to use some of this liquid gasket to mount the woofer on the rear dash of the car. So we're ready to put this thing back together. Quickly, here's the underside of the Polk Audio woofer with the bracket attached. Here's the original harness is soldered on. Just please be careful when you're soldering these or reconnecting these, however you do it. Make sure they're well wrapped and insulated. You don't want a short to kind of ruin all of this nice work you did. So make sure your wiring is secure and there are no shorts and reliable. Because once you put this together, you'd like to leave it that way. Alrighty, so we got the sub back in. So it's kind of tough to tell, but I used some of that liquid gasket around the trim of the deck. And then we just kind of screwed it back in with those 10mm bolts, one on each corner, and and then reattached the wiring harness, and we're in. So now it's just putting the car back together in reverse order, as the Hayes manual always says, and to give it a sound check. So I hope this helps everybody else who has a blown sub, and hopefully makes this easier for them, and it makes it easier for me next time I blow this. So thank you for watching.